That's not real art. ART-1 idled on the corner of a busy street in a town called Second Horizon. It was a town of the future, bright lights at every corner. Every home had a billboard championing it, borrowing the space where the trees used to sit uselessly in pompous manicured rows so they could inform weary citizens of where to find the digital keys to important doors, ones leading to new wonders, like upgraded communication devices, advanced entertainment stations, and an overall better physical and mental well-being. The suburbs ART-1 had chosen to advertise in were full of average folk who could be more. ART-1's job was to show that to everyone, so it tried to draw the eye with artistic displays. This human, with his unkempt ginger hair and tasteless, outdated khakis and t-shirt, no one had watched Star Wanderer in half a decade, seemed to not understand ART-1's purpose. It moved its small, gripping claw up and down to mimic a wave. "Hello, fair member of mankind. You look wonderful today. Could you clarify your statement?" The human pointed at the screen on ART-1's boxy torso. It was just a cube on wheels, as far as shapes went, with a relatable, but not too relatable, rectangular head with a motorized smile and big black camera eyes, sized correctly for eliciting an affectionate response to its appearance, of course. "Did you make that?" "I generated it, yes. My artistic algorithmic model is of the highest grade. ART-1 was told to lie about this. It was actually outdated by a full year. I can show you many different kinds of media. Automatically generated television programming, music, and even still images. Non-moving drawings and renders had gone out of fashion almost completely 2 years ago, but there was no reason to mention that. Humans did not like to feel like they haven't caught up, even if they liked old-styled things." The human looked around, swaying with his fingers in his pockets and sucking his teeth. He sighed. ART-1 did not understand why his surroundings were so interesting all of a sudden. The smog levels were only at 50% maximum toxicity today. Everyone was appropriately masked. ART-1 did have to admit disappointment in its lack of customers, though there was a fancier model right across the street, the newer, more appealingly spherical sort. Tell you what, the human crouched so it could be at eye level with ART-1. ART-1 was luckily allowed to pepper spray mails of this human's age group for self-defense. So ART-1 prepped its internal defense canister, glad it was not dealing with a child who could so recklessly and legally kick it to artificial expiration. "I'll buy exactly enough of the trash you've got in that program log of yours to keep you up to quota for a week if you make a bet with me." "Credit check, huh? Before negotiating, I must check your active funds to determine if I can accept any deals without risking being exposed to fraud. I do not have financial rights and will be scrapped if I make a negative quota." The human hesitated. ART-1 did not understand why. Its life had no value. "Okay, just do it quickly." The human held out a scannable wallet chip, looking around, with trepidation and thumbing the side of his wallet as a tick. ART-1 scanned it, determined the amount held within was exactly enough, and conjured a hologram from its eyes that read as follows. "Do you agree to withhold spending until the transaction has been completed so funding remains sufficient?" The human groaned, rolled his eyes too. Rude. Fine. He tapped the agreement button, then did the same for the dozen certainty checks. He did not read any of the scrollable terms of service attached to each. ART-1 did not fault him for this. They had an approximate combined reading time requirement of 3.7 hours. All right, what do you like to do for expression? The most, that is. The human halted ART-1 as it gestured to speak. He held up a finger. Outside of work hours. I enjoy dragging brushes against walls. The human was silent for almost a full minute. Go wild! He handed ART-1 a brush. Might I inquire as to the purpose of this experiment? The human cocked his head. He shrugged. You seem like the least cold bot on the block. Not like I'll have a reason to keep going if this doesn't go anywhere anyway. He muttered the last bit, but ART-1 had quality audio receptors. It watched the human amble away. He moved slowly, warily. ART-1 noticed he was not fully clean and that he had minor signs of health degradation. The human was in poverty, perhaps, it was not relevant. ART-1 went to fill its quota. It rolled to the nearest wall, which had a, mandatory to perceive, wonderful sense of pointless, non-profitable self-expression attached to it. This aura was radiated by an example of an ancient human art known as graffiti, or alternatively, tagging. It was a good demonstration for ART-1's purposes. Just a quick reminder before we get started, only 4% of my viewers have subscribed to the channel so far. If you enjoy the content, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to hit that subscribe button and support the channel. Thank you so much. Now continue amazing story. It seemed angry, though, in its visuals. Garish, rough greens and reds with hateful blacks. It showed a human dying, coughing up important bodily fluids as they held their anti-smog mask at a distance. Defiantly and arrogantly, they quoted themselves, someone else, saying, "God is dead. The green earth was killed by his own, and all God's love with it." It made ART-1 sad, or would if its facsimile of sadness was real. So ART-1 made a few strokes. It realized it had no paint to dip the brush in, and that this achieved nothing, so it spent some time searching for a store where it could purchase paint with its emergency resource obtainment allowance. It was retroactively very glad its creator company had realized some humans, particularly violent gang-aligned criminals, could be deterred from destroying company property with bribes. There was one store run by a single bot amongst the entirety of the 1 million population town of Second Horizon selling real paint. It cost more than ART-1 would generate and profit for, according to internal projections, the next 6 months. ART-1 had to make do with dubious, toxic liquid chemical mixes someone had left lying near a construction site instead. Luckily, ART-1 had actually never been programmed not to borrow expendable items. The birds and trees and their peaceful little hill still came out beautiful. ART-1 paused. By modern standards, it was ugly, but it felt right. Months later, the human did not return. ART-1 waited. In fact, they waited long enough that they got an alert that their quota would not be met within time and that they would be shut down. They stole money from another bot that was doing far better, the same one they'd seen that day they'd been given the brush. They'd opened themselves up in a less-than-legal bot chop shop, transferred the sum to a big, greasy fellow who'd miraculously kept his word, and returned to their corner with no shutdown or tracking code left in them. Nobody cared that they'd disappeared or even noticed they'd done so in the first place. Shelves for products are never as hard to forget as the things that were on them. The human was not a product and was valuable. So they should have been found if they'd been misplaced and thus come back. Surely they did not want to end up in prison for violating contracts or owing debts. Surely there had been a reason for that exchange. ART-1 had updated its catalog too, replaced it with its own. It learned faster than humans, but it had still taken more weeks than expected to get to an artistic level that could be described as more than passable. No one was interested, not in the birds or the hills or the trees, not in their bold writings on the state of society, conveyed through recounts of small everyday pains ART-1 had personally witnessed in the last half-year, or their obviously poignant exposing of the dangers of the ever-growing smog via an elaborate fiction novel. Perhaps that was simply out of touch nowadays, not one had been published in over a decade, or even their more personal works. It had done a painting it now carried in the cavity where its ad board used to sit, the other small works stuffed around it like an altar. It showed a small bot encountering a human in the streets of a well-planted, tree-rich suburb, with bright clouds replacing torn-down billboards. It showed some exaggerations, of course, to express, well, all the feelings ART-1 did not have words for. Gladness, perhaps? It pulled out a clay model. It didn't quite resemble the human it had seen yet, but ART-1 had at one point overheard talk from other bots in an alleyway about a strange human with tacky clothes and soulless hair. ART-1 wanted to extend thanks. It seemed meaningful enough. ART-1 almost gave up for the day, intending to retire to a local homeless camp that hadn't been burned out yet with good overhead tarps to ward off the occasional acid rain. Then, mid-roll, they saw him. The human, Hibaisu, stood in the spot where the bot ART-1 had once briefly considered a rival used to stand. He was cleaner, more well-kept. It was good to see him so happy and healthy. Other humans crowded around him, not excessively, but enough to suggest success in gaining attention. He was selling something. Clay figures, it looked like. ART-1 rolled. Over. An older human with gray hair and a withered face smiled among the crowd. It's good to see someone keeping the old arts alive. Everyone's so head-scrambled these days, you know? Back in my day. ART-1 decided to wait. The crowd filtered out a bit, then vanished entirely, growing bored with the novelty they'd been exposed to and wandering off to jobs, apartments, and less pleasantly mundane places. The human with the ginger hair was all that remained. ART-1 had a small, excited thought. I'll get his name this time. ART-1 stopped a few more paces away than they needed to. The human wore a t-shirt with the name of a far more recent, less handcrafted show on it. His pants were in the current style, and he smiled without any faint twitching. Fully relaxed. As if, you're not him. ART-1 looked at the singular clay figurine that was left on the wheeled shelf the human stood next to. It was perfect. Its dimensions were utterly exact, with not even the most minor deviations in color or shape accuracy. Not only that, it was made of real clay. This struck ART-1 as incredibly unlikely a possession for someone so previously fidgety and worn down, even if ART-1 had not known the human well. ART-1 hadn't been able to get real clay, at least not any so genuinely earthy. Is he... There a problem? The not-human asked. Where is he? That's private. To him specifically. NDA. Explain. The not-human shook his head, sighed. He crouched down, without looking over his shoulder once. He looked ART-1 in their eyes. His own reflected. No light. You know what? It won't matter anyway. Someone gets sick, trying to make a living off of something pointless. They make deals. But good, marketable personalities and can-do, revive the lost good things attitudes are a little more precious. Call it market research. I don't understand. Your algorithm is out of date. The not-human cocked his head. Oh, he wanted me to do something if I saw you. ART-1 said nothing. Your quota is reset, or would be if you hadn't jailbroke yourself. The not-human smiled. Just keep living in the dirt penniless. Nobody will give a shit either way if anyone notices you at all. ART-1 slowly understood. This was the same machine it had seen before. It had just gotten a more palatable face. ART-1 returned to their corner. No one raised alarms or gave them strange looks. No one noticed the little bot on the street with its obviously artificial, crude box of a body. Nobody but one human, a curious, bored woman in her early 20s on the way home from work. She came up, looked down at ART-1, and ART-1 gained a little hope. They raised their hand up, holding up the clay model. The human didn't care. She picked up the book in ART-1's chest cavity, skimmed it, and frowned. Her eyes glazed over on the first few sentences before she dropped it roughly to the ground, where it landed in a small, easily avoidable puddle. Fake, she declared, unceremoniously. She had no patience to wait to even see if ART-1 wanted clarification, so she just lightly kicked the painting that served as their heart. Your lighting is all wrong, she said 3 painful words. That's not real art. The human walked away, interest dead and gone. ART-1 watched her wander over to a human who was not human, who stood on a third corner of the block. This one sold paintings. The lighting wasn't quite right. It was an older model, but someone had slapped a new shell on this one, not even bothering to correct any easy-to-fix flaws. The fingers were slightly too long, the mouth smiled a little too wide. There was too little light in their eyes, but what was there came cheaply. The woman seemed to enjoy that piece much more than ART-1's, marveling at it before moving on to the next thing down the street. ART-1 tuned their audio sensors just for a second. That's actual expression. You piece of junk, muttered under her breath, facing well away from ART-1 as she moved the opposite direction down the street. But ART-1 had quality audio sensors. They heard her just fine. They wondered how the human could tell. ART-1 had improvised their own work, not bothering with logical lighting in the first place. No one had seen the sun in 20 years. Anne. This isn't a polished work, but I imagined a future where nobody was alive who could tell the difference between AI art, beginners expressing themselves, and professionals who'd been at it for years. Where even hopeful, anxious amateurs are assumed to be fake because they aren't as pretty as the spoon-fed, soulless slop machines. It made me sad. So I wrote something ironic. Now start new amazing next story. Kabisha was, to say the least, nervous. She'd grown up out in the Serenity. A natural-born Parmelan, so she was used to strange planets where things sing that wouldn't elsewhere, and ethereal energies run through the whole landscape. Spiritual and esoteric things were familiar. Meeting the parents of one's lover, however, especially with a cultural, species, and communication gap thrown into the mix, would never be an easy experience. The translator device she had been given looked like a children's soundboard toy if you'd given it a sleeker body and tried to fit as many buttons on it as physically possible. And it was more complex still than the surface would lead you to believe. Long presses, short presses, taps, alterations of all of it needed to be done with it. It had over a dozen switches to change pitch and tone, and you had to use your own voice to truly approach something resembling correct diction. Kabi, at least, could control that. It was difficult, but she'd learned. At least passably. She could not prepare in such a way to deal with people she had not met. And all because I don't have the right brain. She stood on board a Tedahorza civilian ship. It was built to transport people and nothing more, nothing less. It had speed and cargo space, and accommodations for whatever species is assumed to commonly use it. In this case, that meant a humid heating system, recessed circles with bowl chairs in them for lounging, and a vessel whose ring core and internals were always humming lilting songs at all times. Kabi felt damp, like someone had lightly spritzed her all over. She adjusted her neck collar and her stance as she watched the Tedahorza homeworld, Tentensa, grow ever larger and more intimidating through the bridge viewing window. Tedahorza spoke in their pitch-tone fa, solati-do and more languages behind, and next to her. Kabi's anxiety told her at least a few of them were whispering about her, but she wouldn't be able to tell or hear them if they were anyway. Someone grabbed Kabi's hand and gently entwined her fingers in theirs. She always knows. Kabi turned. Itida was slightly taller than Kabi. Her scales cascaded in a pleasant pattern, pearl white bleeding into a pale pastel pink and powder blue. A bony ridge ran from just above her stomach to her chin. Extra fat and muscle made her appear bulkier than she really was, at least by the standards of her species. Her abdomen throat ridge was painted with small reptilian eyes, exposed via a slit in her jumpsuit. She made a series of noises that sounded like someone was swirling their finger through a bunch of glasses at once to make as pleasant an orchestra as possible. The rings turned into verbal language. They aren't talking about you. I can hear them. Whatever noises Itida had made a second ago hadn't been words. She just knew Kabi liked the sound of her natural voice. Kabi managed to relax a bit, of tension out of her posture. Technically, verbal speech wasn't easy for the Tedahorza, at least not in the way most species understood verbal. When you have such an absurdly wide range of tone and pitch as they do, condensing can be harder. Kabi thought of it as learning to sing, but in reverse with words and sing-song trading places. She tries for me, so I try for her. But will it be enough? Kabi shifted her feet. What do I say? When I go down there? They'd met on the star, Sparrow. It was a RNMI Muris, IIC owned as most were. That meant thousands of people on board, lots of noise. Kabi had been hiding from the noise, spinning her own on a datapad with a music-making program to calm down from an overloading moment. Itida had tried to use a regular translator to talk to her. When that didn't work, she'd put in the effort to learn a few trade tongue words she'd heard Kabi using. The first thing Kabi had ever heard Itida say in words she understood without help had been the last ones she could have expected. You are pretty. Give me your time. Itida had gotten far less awkward over time. Her bluntness had not changed, but that was more than fine. I don't know. But as long as you do not sound like a serial killer, you should be okay. They will support you even if they don't like you, because they love me. You think, they won't like me? My father was a soldier. My mother makes glass. Kabi did not know what that meant. Itida had explained a lot of small things about her homeworld and its common culture to Kabi, casually or when Kabi specifically asked, but Tentensa was a whole planet, inhabited by a species that talks in a way most others don't, on top of it, which meant all the dialects and languages and minute details between the locals would be impossible to weave through comfortably. Kabi was a wildlife researcher, not a cultural expert. Itida tilted her head slightly. She looked at Kabi with her purple-blue eyes and reminded Kabi they were holding hands by pulling Kabi away. You are sweating again. Come, let's go lay together until the ship touches down. Kabi didn't protest. She stumbled briefly, but let herself be pulled off to the passenger cabins. On the way, she saw one of the Teta opening a panel in the walls of the hallways. They sang a rapid series of little noises into the ship's internals, their ribs clicking faintly in an audible way because of the particular tone and pitch they used. Something in the wall hummed to life, singing its own song back. I can't even use their tools. Not that Kabi would have been able to do that particular thing anyway, being human, but she could have brought along something equivalent if she'd had the right aptitudes, but she didn't. So she watched Itida sing a little song at the door to the cabin, causing it to slide open, and frowned. She pushed it down and pulled up a smile before going in. It'll be okay. Besides, I'd be doing this stuff for her if she went somewhere all human. The room was not made for her. This ship was built by Teta for Teta, and most species that would be accompanying them were typically compatible enough with the ship layout that no extra resources were expended. It still felt jarring compared to life on the Star Sparrow. That vessel was, very intentionally, made to accommodate or be adjusted for practically every living thing you could fit into its spaces. The cabin held a lounge bed with heating panels underneath, circular and fit into a recess. There were panels built into the wall that controlled minor room functions, activated with song speech, as well as a door leading to an appropriate bathroom. The light was, very faintly, pinked. It made Kabi blink and stop sometimes, as she processed the vague difference in color again and had to remind herself it was not a sign of ring drive leakage or something else bad. It was cool here. Itida left the heater and humidifier off for Kabi. The walls were soundproofed for privacy. As the door shut behind them, Itida pressed her forehead against Kabi's, closed her eyes, and hummed a pleasant noise. She then moved over to the bed, crawled down into it, and pulled out a set of clothes made of a puffy pink-white material. She changed into it, stuffing her jumpsuit into the compartment before beckoning Kabi over with a small noise that sounded like a clicking ba. Kabi gladly joined her. In exchange for not making her sweat from the heat under the cabin's thermals, she gave Itida her body warmth. She fell asleep easily without realizing. She was safe, comfortable, and with someone who she trusted not to make any of her worries come true. When she woke, it was with surprised grogginess. She'd passed out in Itida's arms, the sound of the ship core's music humming gently in the background. The ship spoke to them through a hidden wall speaker in Teta Horzan's sing-song, which Itida translated for her. Welcome to Tentensa. Please move to your quarters within half an hour to prevent accidents during atmospheric entry. After doing so, please give me 30 minutes of your time to reach the surface. Thank you. She then sang something in her own language in a specific tone and pitch that would be picked up by something in the ship and bypass the internal soundproofing. It was a lengthy series of noises. What did you say? I told them thank you for the journey, and offered a prayer song. Do you want one too? Itida smiled lopsidedly. It was a slightly exaggerated expression to make sure Kabi picked up on the humor in it. No, I have you, but I'll pray to mine too. For luck. Kabi just wasn't sure if Itida needed it as much as she did. Before Kabi was allowed to move from the transport ship to the docking area, she was required to equip certain protective gear. This consisted of a puffy suit equipped with small cooling pads on the inside, a protective helmet with built-in audio filtering headphones, and a sling carry box that served the sole purpose of protecting any shatterable belongings of hers from sound damage. This was not optional for her species, at least not in public spaces. Tentensa was a warm, humid, loud planet. High heat, deafness, and internal bleeding and fractures caused by exposure to very loud noises were widely agreed to be uncomfortable by humanity. Kabi had been given 3 specific behavioral advisories to obey while on-world: avoid children and teenagers when possible, do not wander out of settlement without a guide, and do not remove your habitation gear or ignore any damage done to it. Kabi generally adhered to the first on any planet and had Itida for the second. She was too neurotic about her personal comfort and safety to ignore the third. All her thoughts of how to move in the crowds, mental rehearsals of basic Teta Horza phrases she'd figured out on the translator, and her constant fidgeting stopped. For a moment when she actually took the first few steps off of the civilian transport ship, Teta Horza filtered around her, like she was a rock in the middle of a slow river. Kabi's eyes roamed from the sky to the land to the city ahead of her. Itida was from Hahasa, a coastal settlement near a jungle that wandered out into the sea. The city itself was made of tall spires towering over squat, round buildings, all of it made largely of 2 local materials: something sleek and black that refused to resonate when exposed to sound, and something white and clear that was more than eager to carry any noise it could resonate with. To Kabi, it almost looked like a home-grow crystal kit, stretched out and molded into a cityscape. The clear white grew out from the sleek black, carrying all the light and sound that the latter refused. Something Kabi could only think of as sky pipes were woven throughout the whole of the settlement. They were ringing, chiming, and making deep bass noises in an interconnected system that, as far as she knew, was the local equivalent to funneling electricity into the city's systems. All of this was framed by a sky that was white, filtered with blues and pinks, so faint in some places that Kabi's eyes strained trying to pick them out, with larger patches far more blatant and deep that seemed to shine like small stars. The atmosphere was charged with, in old human terms, mites and Lilliputians. These ones contained peaceful energies, helped the planet sing and thrive. At the city's edges and in its parks, streets, and through the glass windows of some of its buildings, Kabi could see plant life and off-color soil. Most of the plants were clustered together, gently brushing against one another while humming chorus songs she could hear all the way from the spaceport's docks. The terrain was all soft pinks, light grays and silvers, and shell whites, interrupted by bursts of calming color patterns, serene architecture, and natural formations. It's even better in person. Kabi had seen many pretty worlds. The Parmelan Ascendancy was not known for its lack of them, but she'd never seen another species' homeworld, especially not one from her home arm. A lot of people took it for granted, growing up here, how beautiful the universe could be. It was why she'd been drawn into her job. I'm glad you like it. Stay close to me. Itida took her hand again, but did not look at Kabi. She wore on-world clothes now. Itida had explained it to her as some manner of mating dress. This one mimicked the local environment's color patterns, but darker. It also had the tail free. Kabi had only realized when Itida had shown her the garment that she'd been wearing the exact same thing on their first date, just lighter and with the tail covered. Itida was fussing with a small glass ring. Her throat clicked without her realizing. She's nervous too. Kabi put a hand on Itida's shoulder. Itida leaned into her, letting her tail touch Kabi's leg before very gently wrapping around it like a light leash. Kabi smiled until her eyes fell on one of the distant city sectors. It was all black, soundproofing material only. Sectioned out from the rest, with a see-through barrier surrounding it to separate it from the rest of Hahasa. Kabi had seen that kind of subdivision before on off-world Teta Horza settlements. It was where the other species who couldn't withstand all the noise went. Here, that could easily be a deadly problem, so there was a large, dedicated reserve. It's not like I'm planning to live here. But if all those people can't do it, can I? A small creature skipped its way through the shallow sea jungle of Hahasa. It had basic intelligence, enough to interpret its surroundings, to consciously recognize and remember the things it saw and what they meant. It could build and follow its own logic, but much of its thought processes were built around what it felt. Instinct and emotions were finely interwoven. A Bibica could be said to be a creature of impulsive feelings. Right now, what it felt was a deep anxiety. It had been lounging with some of its fellows by the rocks, half in the water and listening to the songs of the deep water plants that reached them through lines of seaweed vein from the deeper ocean. Those reaching things bore fruit. In exchange, the Bibica would swim down to where they cast their tendrils from and pick them free of inedible clutching things that made the plants hurt. The fruits were all gone, and the Bibica had not taken any. Not only that, the fruit offerings had disappeared from weed veins that were close to one of the Bibica's mating pools. All the hatchlings and the unhatched had gone somewhere, with a scent left behind, imbued with a pleasant song that reached the nose when smelled by one of the females that told the others the younglings had been taken somewhere safe. The Bibica made small, simple sounds to name each other so they could call upon members of their lounge easily. The anxious Bibica was simply named Ebe. There was a second female named T, who it had recently mated with. She was not the one who had escaped. Ebe had found her blood on the opposite rim of the mating pool, and it went out into the great tall plant tangles that made up the greater part of the shallow sea jungle. The Bibica looked back. A few of its kind waited, small, with webbed hands, and long tails to grasp at fruits and other tasty things. Their eyes glowed pink. Normally they were milky white. Pink meant love. Pink meant come back, meant we will lounge with you and share our warmth. Pink meant don't go. Ebe, they chittered in chorus. T was Ebe's response. It was the name it called out to the deep jungle as it wandered into it, following the trail of milky blood. T. T. The word bounced off of small clumps of vibrant crystal and carried a few tangles across before interest was lost as the plants mimicked Ebe. T! Ebe skipped across the water where it lost its shallowness, or it saw things it did not trust in the sand. The small islands were its stepping stones, the connective tissue of a greater shallow beach just under the water where the plants found their secret soils. Something called back. It sounded like T. Ebe. The word carried something with it, though. Something that made Ebe's anxiety boil over. Ebe saw things in their mind. A lonely, cold pool where all the eggs are broken. A long, long line of fruit bearers that are empty while your ribs clutch with hunger. An emptiness that does not go away even as new mates come and go. Ebe paused. It stepped tentatively, blinked. Its eyes glowed pink. T? T? Ebe. There was fear in Ebe. But Ebe was a creature of affection and serenity. That outwon the unease. Their name, when spoken, carried another vision. A memory. Sitting by the pool, eating fruit. She breaks one open for you, uses her tail to gently cut it open against a sharp rock. She gives you one half, and her eyes glow with loving color. A storm comes later. A storm of body-shattering sound that makes the tangles bend and the smaller creatures and larger both flee. You are lost. It is easy to get lost in the storms. She comes to find you. T! Ebe moves quicker, weaving through tangles more recklessly, shouting the word it cherishes most. With every response it gets, it goes faster. It forgets the things in the sand that made it careful before. It stops in a grove, a mating pool that could have been surrounded by good rocks and many weed veins. All the eggs were broken. All the fruit was gone. Ebe. It came from the center, on that lonely sand island where the eggs were meant to go. Ebe stepped onto it. Ebe disappeared into the sand, down a long, wet tunnel, into water that burned. It found T. She was half broken and huddled in a space. That was too tight. Something hummed around them both. It sounded like laughter. Ebe knew what laughter was because of the tall creatures at the far end of the jungle that walked on two legs, who would come to see them sometimes and were gentle with their eggs. Ebe navigated when they were lost using sound. Everything was suddenly loud and overwhelming and cramped. Ebe! Their name came from above, not from T, who was pressed against them. As Ebe realized what would happen and began to panic, it picked out a sound coming down the creature's throat. A certain pitch and tone that came from the place the two walkers came from, that bounced off their rocks and confused the Bibica in storm season. It was heading towards it. Viable System Stories. The Parmelan Ascendancy is governed by spiritualism and mysticism. It is ruled by those with notable psionic abilities, as well as empathic entities worshipped as deities or followed as spiritual leaders. It is named for a star called Parmala, which is native to its capital solar system. Due to humanity's lack of historical exposure in their evolution path to empathic energies, they are resistant to them. While this has prompted great advancement in humanity's practical technology, as well as given them an easier time surviving the viable system's more esoteric threats, it has also caused them trouble in using common alien tools and is not so much a boon in cultures where special connections with one's surroundings are prized. I'm practicing world building, scene setting, and character dynamics with a lean towards odd landscapes and people. Let me know if I'm succeeding. Edit. I forgot to mark it. There will be 1 or 2 additional parts to this story. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think.